entertaining. Glad you can join us. Yup.
Pass the mic.
Welcome to the table. We stable the people and killing fables. Yeah, what you came here to do? Pass the mic, break you down like a crossover from AI. Ooh. Right in your eye. Just Jeff. What's next? It's the board off, he rip the pages out your text. Dude Steve, like the movie, the Murdershed.
Chop it up.
He shall kill me. Did it, G? Dude, please, the Bruce Lee, the fucking SE, then there's OZ. You know nothing about nothing, man. Fucking mute Oz.
Yeah, man, we're going down. That deep dive.
Grab your drinks, your paper and pen. Class is down with session.
That deep
Let the
dive.
lessons begin.
They don't be knowing nothing about nothing.
Pass the mic.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Atheist Roundtable. It's TART Live. I'm Oz. Ben G, what's going on, man?
Hey man, how's it going? Just got done with like a nice, pretty good day at work, and I'm excited to get in it tonight. Have some deep dives.
Let's go. And Ben actually lied. He didn't just get done working. If you can't tell, we both just left the golf course and ran home to do the live cast tonight. So thanks for everybody for joining us tonight. We have an awesome guest with us, and we have a couple of our Christian friends and guests that are going to jump on with us tonight too. So it's going to be a great episode. Thanks for joining us, and let's get this thing started. Ben, we're going to bring onto the screen the one and only Shannon Q.
Join me in a round of applause.
Oh god.
How are you, Shannon? How are you, Shannon?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
I'm really happy
Very
to be
good,
here.
very good.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. It takes some bravery to hang out with a bunch of knuckleheads like us. But we do appreciate
I've done
it.
work.
Before we get into it, I always want to make sure, so I don't forget, because I got the memory of an ant, to make sure that you get to plug and chill away on your content, where they find you, that kind of thing. It is already in the description, but I want to give you a chance to do that. So the floor is yours.
Okay, so I am Shannon Q. I have a YouTube channel called Shannon Q. I engage in complex conversations there with people who are either diametrically opposed to my beliefs or engage in research or conversations surrounding things that are generally more on the controversial side of things in order to model better dialogues. I have a degree in psychology, and I am a massive mental health advocate, so I cover a lot of the intersection of psychology and faith there. I am an atheist myself. I also co-host two separate call-in shows, one called The Line on a channel called The Line, and I co-host the Sunday show there. And I am one of the regular rotation co-hosts for a show called The Atheist Experience. So yeah, that's what I do. I'm that girl you saw on that Atheist show once and you can't quite remember her name. That's who I am.
I think I remember the first time you showed up in the chat, and I was like, wait a minute, I know that name from somewhere. And then you rotated back on to AXP, and I was just like, this person listens to it. Yeah, it totally happened. I totally remember having that moment.
I like this show. It's great.
And Shannon, you it was just this last 2 days ago now. You co-host with Matt on there, and you had I believe yesterday. You had a gentleman on there that called in about statistics, and that he took in Genesis. He built this like secret formula or whatever. I actually rewound that and listened to it at least 2 times because I was dying.
Oh, really?
It was because you were asking the most basic, and I'm not a mathematician by any stretch, and you're asking questions, and I was like, well, I know the answer to that. If this guy's putting all these equations and solutions together, how does he not know?
Yeah. So, but the point that I was trying to get to there was that he didn't even know why he was using specific formulas to analyze his data set. He had no idea. He had just come up with some formula that I think it looks like it was probably just flat probabilities, but had built a hypothesis around it without using any sort of inferential statistics. Anyway, I'm a little bit of a stats nerd, but I was trying to demonstrate to him and everybody watching that he didn't even understand how he was assessing his data set or what the statistics would even show if he knew what they were. Because he just kept calling in, and I kept watching him call in when some of my other co-hosts were hosting, and I was like, okay, like this, I'm done. let's just put a nail in the coffin. Let's just end it.
And your facial expressions, and then Matt over there playing chess the whole time, like, yep, heard this before.
He really was. He legitimately played 2 chess games on that.
Like I finished the first like few classes for a second degree, and I was really proud of myself. I recognized the word ANOVA, and I recognized the word t-test, and I felt like I had a review in that. I think that 5 minute chunk.
I should have thrown in a chi-square just for you then. If you're in first round statistics, you would have. I should have thrown in a chi-square.
Oh, already going way over my head.
Oh, okay, sorry, never mind that.
I was about to say we're already out of my league. So
Yeah.
before we get into a couple of your personal content questions, I guess it'll still be personal too, but it's a little more on the fun side. So I tell people as often as I can when this comes up that your interaction and Atheist Pastor's interaction with Darth Dawkins are officially my 2 favorite to date.
Oh.
You guys were amazing and hilarious at the same time. There were some observations that you made in there that I remember you pointing out, like, no, I see what you're doing here, or I see what you're doing there. What was your takeaways once that stream was over? What were your takeaways from that experience?
Oh, God, okay, that's such a long story because I wasn't even supposed to be there. I wasn't even supposed to be there that day. Somebody else was supposed to be talking to him, not me. So I got a message about 3 hours before they were going to go live saying, hey, can you come and talk to this guy? And I was like, well, maybe, sure, but I don't do debates. But if he wants to have a conversation, then fine. So James, who hosts Modern Day Debate, he was like, yeah, he's up for a conversation. We can do a conversation, but he wants to talk about why you aren't a Christian. I was like, oh, okay, cool. We can talk about the soul because that's one of my linchpins, like the soul and morality. So that would be a good thing for us to have a dialogue about. Mm-hmm. And then I immediately realized, as I think so many other people did in real time in that conversation, that he was not interested in having a conversation. He's a script runner, and he's a bit abusive and manipulative in order to batter people into getting back on his train of conversation. So in order to get me back on the dialogue track, he was using abuse tactics, like really classic abuse tactics. Like he was gaslighting. He was also essentially calling me foolish or an idiot or saying that I didn't comprehend questions in order to put me in a defensive posture. Because if I was in a defensive posture, I was more likely to attempt to demonstrate to him that I could answer the questions, which is what he wants. So that he was well attuned in his strategy. But I realized immediately that I wasn't going to be able to get a good conversation out of him. So I wasn't interested in getting a good conversation anymore. What I was interested in is pointing out his dialectic strategies so that other people who were engaging with him and people like him would be more prone to realizing when they're being abused in conversations and be able to employ strategies to not give into those tacts and be manipulated. So I chose to do that instead because I knew I wasn't going to compel him and I knew he wasn't interested in a conversation with me. So I figured that was the most fruitful way to engage in the dialogue at that point. So I just on the fly made a decision. Something stepped in my head and I was like, well, let's just point out what you're doing then, because we're not going to be able to have a conversation and I'm not going down your script line. Like it's not a thing that's happening. You're not in charge here. I know you're used to thinking you're in charge here, but guess what? Not today. We're going to point out everything you're doing in real time and just see what happens because I'd rather be interested than bored. So that's what, that's what I did.
It was, and have you seen Atheist Pastors?
Yes. I like that he chose the tack of being a Hindu.
Yeah. The morning of, he's like, oh, I got a revelation.
Yes.
It was fantastic.
I thought that was really like, because he obviously was well versed in his script. The thing is, before I went into that conversation, I was like sort of tangentially familiar with who he was. I'd seen him once call into Talk Heathen, and I really like Alex Smallpass, so I had seen him have a conversation with Alex Smallpass, and that was it over the course of however long I've watched YouTube and had heard about him, but I'd never really watched him do stuff. So I didn't prepare for, or know that I should prepare, but I prefer it the way it went down, really, to be honest with you.
I think like one of the key characteristics of his material is just like the dehumanizing that happens. Because if you hear him, all of that, what's the Rabbit YouTube channel that's out there where we
Tom.
also get
Tom Rabbit.
yeah, we also get to hear a little bit of the talk that happens before he goes on these shows. He says, "Yeah, there's another atheist call-in show. I'm going to call in and tell this atheist exactly the same thing." And so there's no concern whatsoever for who he's talking to, because there's this assumption that happens that every single person he's talking to believes the exact same things. That's why he supposes that his script should work, and so I think that's really interesting too. The dehumanization aspect that's there,
And he uses that as a failsafe, I think, too. He uses it as a failsafe because to him, as soon as somebody deviates from the response set that he's anticipating and requires to progress along, then he levels them with abuse and uses that as a demonstration that they're too dumb to even comprehend what he's talking about. So he can still push his chest out and bang it and be like, "Oh, I nailed that atheist."
And the thing that I'm
stop the conversation.
I'm always afraid of just saying look, I don't understand. Could you please explain? What's going to happen at that point is, well, then you just got to do more learning, and well, then you couldn't possibly understand. And yeah,
you have to be able to accept that, you need to be able to, if you're going to be in these conversations with especially more abusive side of apologists, you need to be able to accept the fact that they're going to level abuse at you in order to put you in a defensive posture. People like him are going to do that. They're going to level abuse at you to put you in a defensive posture. And you need to just be like, okay, yeah, no, maybe I did that multiple times in the conversation. I went, I'm a bit of a moron, tell it to me like I'm 5. Don't assume that I know anything. So that took that power away from him because I was no longer going to be defensive or allow him to be emboldened by me taking offense to him saying that I was stupid. I was like, well, let's just acknowledge I'm stupid so we can progress. And he didn't know what to do with that.
I love it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And speaking of psychology and abuse, that's a perfect segue into my first question. And a couple of these are actually from that video that I just watched yesterday and today. Okay. I've watched it twice now because coming from religion and abuse and trauma from my experiences in faith, a lot of that sticks out and screams at me. At one point you said, I sometimes I feel like I'm the only person talking about this, and there's days that I feel like that. It's like, is there anybody else that cares about this? So when you said that, I was like, yes, fuck yes. But
I'm so glad.
But you, one of the things you said a couple times is the manipulation, the mind games that not all, some of these pastors or preachers use with their flock or their people. That it's we don't go to mental health professionals. We don't go to mental health physicians because our source, our healing is in God. And it's now adultery if you go to these doctors. How do we, Shannon, your opinion, what do we do to make a bigger impact for those people that are victims there?
Oh, that's such a hard question because I think so much of it is case by case. But I think one of the really important things that you can do is be supportive and less combative when people who do have faith in whatever are being stifled from seeking mental health counseling and treatment and therapeutic avenues because they're being told that that's an idolatrous thing to do, that shows to it's presented to them as though that is a symptom of a lack of faith, the fact that they need some sort of help because and this isn't everybody. I need to make sure that I have that stipulation. Not all faiths are like this and not all religious people are like this, but it is relatively prevalent and it is worth addressing and requires addressing. They pose it to them as though you needing mental health therapy from a secular counselor is just showing that you don't have enough faith in God to heal your soul, because this is a soul problem, which is one of the reasons that I have problems with concepts of the soul. And to support those people, I think the best thing that you can do, one of the things that worked for me or works that I've said and that I've gotten feedback that it works is you wouldn't go to a spiritual doctor. You wouldn't go to a spiritual dentist. You wouldn't go to a spiritual podiatrist. You wouldn't go to a spiritual oncologist. You would go seek somebody who is professionally trained in the field and you would seek them for help. Why would it be any different when it's something to do with your brain? Like, you need to be able to acknowledge that even if you do believe in a soul, there is a component of your physiological anatomy, your brain, that does absolutely affect these things, does affect your mood, does affect your behavior, does affect your emotions. So if you can recognize that there's a physiological component to you that can affect these things, you should seek somebody who's professionally trained in understanding the physiological components of that. And your pastor just isn't. They just aren't. They can't recognize symptoms that may need to be treated. And it doesn't show a lack of faith. It shows that you have a respect and a reverence for yourself. And if your God loves you, he should want you to have a respect and reverence for yourself and seek being healthy.
Absolutely. Could not have said that better myself. I applaud that. And again, a great segue. And I'll ask this, and I want Ben to get a few questions in here before we get our other friends here on screen. And I believe it was that same episode. I might be mistaken, but you talked about basically the vocal transmissions and voice inflections and those kind of things. And people think I'm crazy when I tell them that there are literally some denominations and some schools of Christianity and religion that will train the pastors and the ministers on the art or the technique of doing that to convince people and to manipulate the mind. Do you have any experiences with talking to people about that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I studied communication theory and absolutely love communication theory. Like, it's something that I think is really, really underrated as a field, and something more people should look into, because everything that we receive in the way of information is communication. Everything that we assimilate into our perception of reality and our, worldview, as it were, all of that is a form of communication. That is something being communicated to us. And there are manners in which we can communicate that are more effective than others. And there are things about communication that people take for granted. And one of the things is vocal inflection. So if I'm somebody that's trusted, right? Because there's context to everything. So if I'm somebody who you trust, and I'm presenting something to you, and I'm using a vocal inflection that's okay, so let's say, what can I say? You should definitely go and see a doctor, because that might be a way that you can get help. Or you should definitely go see a doctor. That might be a way you could get help. I said the same thing in two different fashions, and I transmitted two different messages while I was communicating, two very different messages while communicating. So vocal inflection plays a really significant role when you're looking at the person who's transmitting the message. And if it's a trusted source, they can say something. This is how a lot of people get out of culpability as well. Because if you look just at a transcript of what they're saying, the words that they are saying are the right words, and the way they are saying it is transmitting a completely different message than the words. So they're able to usurp accountability by pointing to the word they say instead of the way that they were saying it, when it's very clearly a different message that's attempting to be delivered. So I think that's really, really important for more people to look at. And you think to yourself, I'm not going to be influenced by that. I understand when somebody's being sarcastic, but when somebody that you're trusting is transmitting information in that way, especially somebody who's a public figure, you should really look into it, especially if they're discouraging you from investigating further, or they're using their language or their communication strategy to try to hinder you from looking further into something. You should really be a little bit more skeptical about what their motivations might be. And when it comes to mental health and many churches, a lot of their motivations, in my opinion, are to keep the people dependent on the church, because if people start to be able to operate independently and they no longer have that dependency cycle where they need to look for emotional support in the church, and they can now operate independently or get help elsewhere, then they remove that dependency from the relationship. Then the relationship becomes voluntary at that point, and the power dynamic changes, and it's more likely that they're not going to necessarily stay there or be as compelled, because there's no longer the emotional dependent aspect of the relationship. So I think that that's a strong motivation, and it just infuriates the shit out of me because people don't take it seriously enough. Everybody looks at the science and the biology and the evolution and the philosophy, and what we are is what we think. Who we are is what we believe. And religion seems to have the market cornered on that and be able to just completely go under the radar when it comes to accountability for their actions in that regard. And it's what affects us the most deeply. It's why all of us come out hurt, or some of us stay in hurt, or some of us lose relationships. All of those things that are the measure of who we are and what matters to us. That's all psychology. Mm-hmm. That's all interaction. And that's all important. That decides how we behave, how we interact, and how we make a world. And more people should say something about it.
Yes. Yes. And I could probably ask you another 1,000 questions, but I'm going to respect our time. No, it's the interest. I could keep going, but Ben, shut me up.
I've got a question. Something that I had from earlier. I'm sure I heard you say this months ago, but okay. I loved what you said, that you had a problem with like souls, or like the concept of a soul. What is it? What's that?
I said I say that all the time.
Yeah. Well, let me ask then, what is it, or if you could recapitulate for the audience here, what is it that gives you a problem with the idea of a soul, or why is it? Do you think it's impossible for a soul to exist, or what about like mind-body dualism? What are your concepts there? I'm sure you have a much deeper understanding than I do.
I think that the Christian conceptualizations of a soul that I've come across thus far seem impossible to me. Now, I'm not going to say that it's absolutely impossible, that there can be a non-corporeal aspect of us. I don't think it's possible, but, maybe. But that's a maybe with an asterisk of probably not.
Well, so say it came, okay. and I've heard this before, there's things in the brain that we just can't explain.
Sure, yeah.
How do you say, like, whatever that is that we can't explain, and I know for anybody watching, they're going to say, well, that's an obvious argument from ignorance. But or an inability.
The gaps.
Yeah, you're filling in the gaps there with God or a soul. But if you said, well, there are things that we just can't explain, do you agree with that statement? Are there things that we can't explain? What are those, and what are some of the theories out there?
Okay, so the one thing that I think we don't currently have an explanation for, and I don't think that it's a deal breaker, is you've heard of what I guess more colloquially it's referred to as the mind-body problem, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we have a cogent sense of self? Because there's no one physical place in the brain that holds our conceptualization of us. At best, it's a conglomerate. Like it's an aggregate of components that manifests as this unified view that we have of who we are. So that's the one thing that we don't currently know. Do I think it's impossible for us to know that? To know how that is an emergent property of existence? No. Do I think that there's some interesting theories and lines of thought about it? Yes. Do I think the soul answers that question? No, not when you hold it up to scrutiny. I don't think it does. Because it all depends on your conceptualization of the soul too. When you're having conversations about the soul, you really have to ask somebody what they mean by a soul. Because some people mean that how they are and who they are just is going to continue existing and progressing after they physically die. Like it's going to just keep going.
So
right?
Like when somebody says, and I'm sorry to interject, but that they
No, please do. Please do. I keep talking. Go ahead.
The question that I have then is when somebody says like, and I still hear this, I can even talk about how like, oh, well, it's kind of like a computer. If a computer shuts down, it doesn't really go anywhere. It's material that is no longer working. When somebody says, where do you go when you die? Is that kind of what you mean, like the mind-body problem? Is that the problem that you're saying? Like, what is you? Like one time I had somebody come up to me and say, Ben, when I say what time is it, what is it? Like it's almost as silly to me, or I think about it in those terms. Is that similar, or what can you tell me? Like, where do you go when you die?
I think what I think is that I just the same place that I was before I was born. I just think that whatever is me stops existing. Like the physical component of me, this decomposes or does whatever, and whatever is me in the way that I understand me and other people experience me just ceases existence. It's just gone. That's what I think. And I think that that's terrifying to a lot of people. I think that existentially that's a difficult thing to reconcile. And because it's a difficult thing to reconcile, we as people work really, really hard to find ways to reconcile it so that we can hold on to this view of ourselves as being continuous. So I can understand the motivation behind it. But when you look at how the brain operates, that's where it all starts to fall apart for me. So when I was studying psychology, I was still a Christian. And I started really studying, neuroanatomy and cognition and how the brain operates. And I read about Phineas Gage, and I read about localization of function, and I read about being lobotomized. And I started to have some really serious questions. Because if you have a concept of the soul, and that concept of the soul is you, and that concept of the soul exists external to you, and is something that interacts with you physically, which is kind of what the dualists seem to think, then how do you explain changes to the physical components of your brain interacting back up with the soul, right? So let's say, for example, I gave you a full frontal lobotomy. Is your soul permanently impaired at that point? Does your soul have the same personality change that I just physically caused you to have in real life? So, and same with, perceptions. Like if somebody is blind on earth and in their physical form, will their soul be able to see if it exists in a perfect form later, even though their brain wouldn't allow that to be a capability? What if they could see and then they can no longer see? Is the soul no longer be? Like a lot of those things I found really interesting. Alzheimer's, when I studied Alzheimer's and most demyelination events, that's when it really started to kind of fall apart for me the most. Like even after Phineas Gage and studying lobotomies, when I started realizing that demyelination events like Alzheimer's and different forms of dementia and multiple sclerosis could affect our access to memories and deteriorate memories, and the realization that we are essentially kind of an aggregate of the understanding and assimilation of our own memories. What happens when those are gone? Like, does our soul lose those memories too? How do you explain that interaction? Because if you can explain it one way, it has to go the other way too. You can't say the soul stays perfect because why, but can influence the brain and then continues to exist, but doesn't have the impairments.
That's
like,
interesting.
All of that doesn't make sense.
You're talking about like the demyelinization. So you're talking about like the myelin sheaths, which connect and allow neurons to communicate with each other.
Myelin sheaths are essentially like, if you look at electrical cord, there's a cord inside of it, and then there's like a rubber insulation around it. So like, I'll hold up these earphones. So these earphones have like a rubber outside, right? This would be the myelin, and inside this sheath, like if this was a neuron connecting an axon, then inside of it would be the actual like neuron. The outside is the myelin. So if I like chew through this wire, so that the electrical wire beneath is now exposed, which is functionally what a neuron connection is, then all of a sudden that wire can't effectively connect like it was before because it was being protected. So the electrical impulse now starts to kind of shoot out in all different directions. And if it degrades too much, the electrical connection will stop, and the neuron itself and the axon it's attached to will die.
So in a way, it's almost literally like so I just put up a Christmas tree, and if like one of those lights goes out and it's not connected, it's kind of like it disconnects the rest of the lights, or
it can have a cascade effect.
It could.
Your brain has some degree of plasticity, though. There's like a small degree of plasticity to your brain, so you can kind of make new connections. But eventually, when you have enough demyelination events, and your brain stops being able to communicate in a meaningful way in specific areas, and when that happens, you could lose memories, you can lose function, depending on what component of the brain it's taking place in. If you get me started about brains, I may never leave.
That's okay. My question I was going to was, okay, so we talk a lot about the demyelinization and how that affects. Okay, well, that brings up questions about your soul. What about just the knowledge that when you build up memories, or so I'm a musician. I teach music, and so I tell my kids, I'm like, guys, you got to build up these. The way your brain works, you repeat an action, and in 2 weeks, you'll wonder why it was ever hard in the first place to play whatever it is they're playing. And I tell them, look, it's just the way that the brain works. You have to go through this process, repeat it so many times. You have to think about it, the way that your hands move, and eventually it becomes muscle memory, which is really connections in the brain. Correct? Am I
Yes.
explaining it? Because if I'm explaining
Yeah.
this wrong, I need to be corrected.
No,
but-
that sounds about right.
Yeah. And so that's how musicians go through processes. That's why you learn scales. You work on scales every day. You're going to know your scales. So what would you say, would that be a decisive demonstration that the soul isn't necessary even for building memories or building skills? Like, so you brought up the demyelinization. What about the knowledge that we have about myelinization itself?
Oh, that's so interesting. So, because that wouldn't even just be myelinization, because myelinization happens just around the neurons. So that in that instance, you're actually, especially when you're young, you go through something called, it doesn't sound very elegant, but it's called branching and pruning. So you get all of
My
these
grandma
pathways.
prunes, but I don't know about how, I don't know if she goes into people's brains.
That's what it's called developmentally, like from
Okay.
from a neuroscience perspective. It's called branching and pruning. So from like a very young age and then up into your teens, your brain is continuing to develop. So all of those neural pathways are really starting to become strong and entrenched and starting to create interconnections with each other, because there's all of these latent neural pathways that can essentially be utilized and strengthened and branch off and connect to other things. So when you're really, really young, you might find it, and you may find this as somebody who's a musician I'm not saying you're old, I'm old, but you're older than the children you teach for sure, right? So
Barely.
you may find that the children, just barely, just a little bit older than the children you teach. So you may find that children are able to adapt to learning those new motor skills a little bit more quickly than if you had picked up a student who's an adult, right? Because a student who is an adult isn't going to be as adept in picking up those skills from a neuro perspective, because it's a little bit more difficult to change the way that those pathways operate, because they're already pretty strongly entrenched and overutilized. Whereas when you're young, they're not really strongly entrenched or overutilized yet. They're still forming. Now, sorry, I got distracted because I was talking about branching. But is that evidence against the soul? I don't know if I'd really thought about it, but I suppose it kind of can be, because you can look at it as though the stimulus that you have, so like the distal stimulus that you have from integrating perceptions into the brain, creates new aspects of behavior and personality. And that perception exists outside of a soul. So if I have sort of like a proximal and distal stimulus, and I'm thinking this through in real time, I love this conversation. So if you being a teacher would be a stimuli that I'm perceiving, and because I'm taking in that information, I'm actually changing the physicality of my brain in order to learn something that's going to fundamentally change an aspect of who I am permanently, and that's changing from a neurological perspective because of that external stimulus. So
I mean, your body
for sure.
Your body is like physically changing then in a way. Yeah. That's amazing to think about. I do have one more question. And before I get there, I want to plug a couple things. I know that we've got Q&A coming up in a little while. I believe that super chats are a thing down there, and stickers. Those help the murderous one find your comments, your questions, and make sure that they stick up later. But I do have one more question.
Sure.
I'm not sure how much you remember about the show, but I know you're a viewer. I love street epistemology.
I know.
If
I
you
love your
had
TikToks.
oh, really? Thank you so much.
Yeah.
If you had like a top 3 or 4 tips or top 10 tips from Shannon Q about street epistemology from what you've observed, whether it's from something that I've done directly or for anybody thinking about it, especially based on your understanding of communication studies, what are some things that you would hope most people would apply in their interactions?
Oh, can I phone a friend? Let me get Anthony on the line. He'd probably be a better person when it comes to street epistemology, because I think street epistemology has slightly different dialectic strategy than me, but very similar in that it's very important to listen and understand and cause the person to introspect. I have 3 pillars on my channel. One is elevate the discourse. The second is be better, not the same. And the third is advocate for your own understanding. And I think that those are good things to bring into conversation. And that's why I chose them, because in any dialogue that you're engaging with, and the last one I think would be honest. Like really be honest. A lot of us engage in conversations because we're looking to win that conversation. And when you're looking to win a conversation, you're not going to necessarily win anybody over if that is your goal. Your goals should align with your intentions. Like if your intention is to own somebody, then I guess by all means do that. But if your intention is to understand somebody better, or your intention is to have them understand you better, you really need to be honest in that conversation and try to be humble about it and admit things like, I don't know, or I have to look into that, or I haven't seen it that way, or what you're saying makes sense. Sometimes we find it hard to say that. Okay, what you're saying makes sense to me. I can understand where you're coming from, and ask elaborating questions and listen. Actually listen. Don't just wait for your turn to fucking talk. Drives me crazy. When people are just waiting for their turn to talk, drives me nuts. I know that's probably a lot.
No,
I think those are all important.
No, elaborating questions. Okay, if you could boil it down, like I was like, whoa, okay, like, so
Yes,
if you could boil it down, I heard elaboration, seeking to understand, and then so I mean those are two big takeaways, and I was just thinking about like, oh, and then being honest. So I do struggle. I think this is where I struggle a lot is I love expressing myself, or that's something that I've been growing into this year, actually, like trying to eliminate that whole well, I just don't have anything to share. I don't have an expertise in this. I don't, just saying like, look, let's just put this out there and see what happens.
Okay.
Even the idea that investigating your own beliefs is a good thing, I've struggled just putting that out there. That's like a really strong claim for me to put out there, that it's a good thing to look into your own beliefs. How do you go about, I guess, marrying those concerns together, that I want to be honest, I also want to advocate for myself, and I also want to have these deeper conversations, sometimes in the form of street epistemology.
Why do you struggle with putting that out there as a claim? I'm just asking a follow-up so I can understand a little bit better, if that's okay. I know this isn't it.
I guess I say I struggle with it. I almost use that I almost use it as a presupposition. I say I'm accepting that society is better off with if more people investigate their own beliefs.
Right.
I don't know if I can demonstrate that.
How would you go about demonstrating it? You don't know how you would go about demonstrating it.
No, I think yeah, I'm getting you. So
I think it could be demonstrated though.
Yeah.
I think it could be demonstrated. But like why wouldn't that be able to be demonstrated? Because essentially if you're saying people are more introspective and understanding of why they believe that the things that they do, that'll ultimately be better for them and society. So I think that you can measure outcomes to get there. You can measure outcomes. So if the outcome is that you have conversations with people where you're engaging in this as a strategy and looking at this as an outcome, and you're open with them, which usually, especially in street epistemology, you would be, and people give you self-report feedback that they feel better about it, then you would be building a body of evidence to support that claim just by engaging in what you're doing.
So like kind of reflecting and evaluating the results that you do have. And by the way, thank you so much, Shannon Q. I'm going to hard cut Oz.
Hi. So abrupt. Who's in time? I'm going to get him again later.
I think Ben and I could probably sit here to do a 3-hour stream with you, just talking about whether it's street epistemology or psychology. We could go on for hours. So we'll to respect everybody's time, we'll keep it there. But so far, Shannon, you've been awesome. Thank you. Thank you for everything. And even in the chat, I saw a couple people that every time I hear Shannon talk, I learn something new. So I always think that's a great compliment. So and real quick, because I was going to plug it at the end of the story, but since you guys brought the name up, the OG, Anthony Magnabosco, will be with us on the 15th. So if you guys enjoy street epistemology, or you're wanting to get or you're wanting to learn more about it, like Ben was talking about, that's the perfect episode to watch and hang out with us, because we're just going to focus and zero in on that. So we're now going to we'll bring Ben back on, and we're going to bring our buddies. And I do want to apologize, because I know they do not call themselves Christians. I'll let them explain that. So I apologize, guys, for because as soon as I said it and I got off the screen, I was like, shit. But I'll let you. So rather than me continue to just put my foot in my mouth, I'll let you guys explain that here in a second. But Seamus and Brad, yet again here at the Atheist Roundtable, thanks for joining us this evening. And I'm going to pop myself off here, and Shannon and Ben are going to have a conversation. And just for the viewers and listeners, so you know, if it sounds kind of awkward at first, it is because we wanted it to be organic. There wasn't a topic. There wasn't anything that we brought up. We wanted to truly be organic and for them just to talk and chop it up. So you guys, when it's time to finish up, you'll see an introduction of you know who. So you guys have at it.
All right.
Hello.
Hello. So I guess we should explain exactly.
Tell them what we are.
More or less what we are.
Yeah. What are you guys about?
Oh man, I kind of want to rip off the Band-Aid. Hey, we also hate Christians. I'm kidding.
I hate Christians.
Who hates who?
No, you're off to a boring start. Okay.
I say that in jest. But we don't really consider ourselves Christian. And the reason behind that is that it's harder to explain our position if we start with we're Christian and then explain why we do and then don't and then do and then don't. And then at the end of that explanation, it's like, well, then you don't really sound all that Christian. So we refer to ourselves as a more Orthodox styled Messianic Judaism, more or less. But we still believe that Jesus was the Messiah. We just call him by a different name, his Hebrew name or Aramaic name, Yeshua. And as a result of these things, there are many beliefs that we have that are in direct conflict with mainstream Christianity. And a little bit of our background, we do come out of Christianity. We used to work as worship leaders in a Baptist church, several Baptist churches. So we're musicians as well, and it was awesome actually hearing you talk about the psychology of the communication aspect, because that's something that we had to sort of practice in the church in order to kind of specifically manipulate an emotion in order to.
I was right.
Yeah, and so we're sitting here listening to it, and we're like, "Yo, yeah."
I mean, it's a real thing. So I think about when I think about like entertaining an audience. You know, if you have a bunch of middle schoolers who are hating what they're doing, you know, and then you're gonna have parents in the stands who aren't appreciating it. So you have to have those like, you know, that mirror neuron reaction where I don't know if that's accurate here, but you know, if you got a lot of kids who are excited about what they're doing, parents are going to be excited. If you're on stage worship leading, and if you're not engaged with the Lord, or you know, all of these things, if you're not showing people how to react appropriately, people are going to feel awkward. I always felt awkward putting my hands up in church when I was in church.
We called it trying to make people drop their guard. Usually people come in, especially on their first time, and they're like, I don't want any part of this, you know, and they kind of put their wall up. And so the music we're trying to do the music to help them put that wall down and allow them to feel their emotions a little bit more personally. And then they're usually more acceptable to whatever the message is that follows. And so our job was to help let people's guard down, which is really weird thinking back on it now that we used to do that a lot.
It's psychology of music as a proto language. It's actually really interesting. Like I don't know where you guys stand on evolution, but evolutionarily speaking, some of the first types of sounds that people make or any species makes is essentially lyrical, and it's meant to transmit some sort of emotional reaction, either the harm or happiness or safety. So music, it really activates a sort of reptilian emotional center in the brain called the cerebellum, and it activates that in a really strong emotional sense, because the earliest forms of proto-language were actually musically inclined. They were actually like series of notes instead of actual phonemes and morphemes, which are like language sounds.
Yeah, so that's still common today in the languages that are closer to the ancient ones.
Yeah.
Like Hebrew is a very musical language. So, but oh man,
I'm interested in hearing. I need to know more about how Jesus is the Messiah in Judaism.
Yeah,
I need to.
I was about to say I'll go down a rabbit hole.
You go ahead, Ben. I'll wait.
So I have one question for you.
Okay.
What religion was Jesus?
Jewish.
Jew.
Well, Well,
Thanks for coming
so
to the episode. We're out of here.
it is actually, it's more complicated than that, isn't
He
it?
wasn't the Messiah to the Jews, though.
No, it's
Well,
really
so-
a lot more complicated.
It's not
than
that there's a lot of complications in it. That comes from the history surrounding the birthing of different
Friend's
religions.
dying.
I'm
So
sorry.
about my background, because I know you're a psychologist, which is honestly super fascinating. I love psychology a lot. I wish I could have minored in
I'm
it.
not a practicing
Well-
psychologist. I just studied cognition and communication theory and have a degree in it. I'm not a
still super
therapist.
cool.
So
You know-
don't be
you know-
afraid of me. I'm not a therapist.
No, still super cool, because that's a topic I really like. But I went to college for history, so I have a completely different
Yeah, cool.
field of study.
I was going to ask about, so Jesus was Jewish.
Yep.
I think about society at that time, Roman society at that time, being almost pretty complex, like almost as complex as our society today. Would there not have been different sects or beliefs within Judaism, including sects of Judaism which meshed with certain amounts of cultic beliefs, whether they're so we call them pagan today, but they would have just been parts of the regular Greek, Roman pantheon of gods, of their religions. Wouldn't there have been all sorts of different mixes within there? And how could we know which one Jesus actually belonged to?
So,
good question.
yeah, that's actually a
Yeah,
great
so
question.
it's-
There actually were. The Bible really only mentions two specific sects of Judaism. But even within those sects, there were subsects. But the outlier, the I guess the more mystically minded, would be the Essene Jews, which are not mentioned in the Bible. But it's highly speculated based on what we know of them at the time that John the Baptist likely probably was an Essene Jew. But they weren't too different from the Pharisees, with the caveat that they were a little more given to mysticism than Pharisees. And Pharisees weren't opposed to mysticism. They just didn't go quite so deep into it as the Essenes. But even within the Pharisee movement, there were, there were actually 5 sects of it in the time that Jesus was alive, but 2 that were primary. And those would be the schools of Shammai and the school of Hillel. And those names don't mean much to you, but basically the Jewish court, the Sanhedrin, whoever was the lead elder of the Sanhedrin kind of was the overseer for what Judaism was at the time. So Hillel would have been the elder of the Sanhedrin during the time that Jesus was like a younger teenager. And for the last 7 years or so, well, not 7 years. Jesus would have died within the 7-year span that Shammai was actually the ruling elder of the Sanhedrin.
And I hate to cut you off because there's like a core to the question.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Shannon might be on it, and feel free to cut me off. But you're welcome.
That was funny.
But if we don't, I guess. My question just still sits at, how do you know that Jesus, or is the idea to practice the same kind of Judaism that Jesus did and accepting Jesus within that?
Okay, so
I was going to say,
I have a whole different
yeah,
line.
too long.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I went and explained a whole lot of that was, I guess, impertinent to the question.
Yes, you did.
But so we actually can determine which one of those schools Jesus followed based on his answers to a few questions. So there's a portion in a few of the Gospels where Jesus is asked, "What is the greatest commandment?" And his response is, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor, right? So first of all, the premise to the question is important because in first century Judaism at that time, that's a question that a prospective disciple would ask a rabbi to see if that's the philosophy he wanted to learn. Okay, so this is somebody who's questioning and inquiring where Jesus's philosophy falls. The answer that Jesus gave is one that actually comes directly from Hillel.
Yeah, and then we have Paul also. His rabbi was Gamaliel, who was the grandson of Hillel, and so we have Paul and Yeshua's teachings that line up in such a fashion that we could greatly conclude that Hillel was the school of thought that Jesus and Paul agreed with, and would go on to teach that and greater Judaism as a whole rejects Shammai outright nowadays. Basically,
So you guys accept the synoptics then, eh? So like you and Johannine Gospels and I'm assuming at least 7 of Paul's letters. So you guys accept those as historically accurate?
Yeah.
So every aspect of them, like start to finish, you accept like all the way up to resurrection?
Yeah.
I didn't hear the beginning of the question. You said something about the 7 Paul's letters.
Like the 7 Paul's letters.
Yeah,
Paul
the
and the synoptic gospels.
Breaking in here, I want to make sure, as you guys think about your responses and your follow-up question, Sean, Alexandre, thank you so much for the super chat earlier down in there. Guys, that's a great way to support the show. And I want to give this back over to Shannon, because I know you had a line of thought there.
I do. Because this is what's interesting to me. Because you guys say you aren't Christians, but you accept all 4 gospels, and you accept Paul's letters, which how do you deviate from Christianity then? Because you're accepting the historicity of Jesus, the resurrection. Where do you deviate? Because it just sounds like Christianity at this point to me.
Historical context and cultural relevance. There are certain core doctrines of Christianity which we do not accept, and there are certain core doctrines
like
of Judaism
biblical
which we do accept.
So there's core doctrines within the Bible, or are you talking about established within the tenets of a specific organizational structure that's built around like a Catholicism or a Baptist? Like, are you talking about denominations, or are you talking about in the Bible?
So it depends. So it actually depends on how you would define that particular. Certain beliefs are obviously held by certain denominations that we would say are biblical beliefs. And so it depends on which lens you want to view us through, I guess, depending on our answers.
I want to view you guys through the lens of who you are and how you come to determine what you believe, because I think it's super fascinating to me, because if I'm hearing you correctly, and that's why I asked that as a foundational question about whether or not it was denominational or textual, because if it's textual, that means that there's components of the text that you absolutely accept and components of the text that you reject. And I'm wondering how you come to a reliable determination as to which would be accepted and which would be rejected, and what those criteria look like.
I think I would say that the answer to the question, I don't know if I would say it's a little more complex than the frame of the question, but I suppose the disagreements that we have with normative Christianity would be whether or not the things that we reject are actually textual.
Oh, so you think they're like interpolations, or?
So this is where I come in. Well,
okay.
not me specifically, but as the historian, this is my favorite answer, because we try to put everything back into the culture and the context in which it was born. So that being said, our least favorite question biblically is, well, what does that mean to you? Because that's, to us, in our opinion, that's the most useless question you can ask, because the letter to Corinthians were not written for you. They were written for Corinthians in the first century to a synagogue that had a basic foundation of certain beliefs and culture and lifestyle. And so we believe that it's impossible to understand the meaning of the text without putting yourself back into the shoes of the person who is receiving the letter. And so all of our interpretations come from our deep attempt to return to that understanding and bring that interpretation back, and then how that impacts our lives now, even though it's, 2,000 plus years later. So that's where our practice is usually different, where we have modern Christianity has certain ways of doing their exegesis, and ours is strictly historical and cultural.
Okay, so if yours is strictly historical, this is one of my favorite humans on earth. Her name is Laura Robinson. You'd love to check her out. She's a Christian, and she's a biblical historian. She goes to Duke. She's a PhD there. I love talking to her about this type of stuff because I always learn so much. But one of the facts of the matter is, when it comes to the Bible, we don't have a lot of like extant existent documentation about like showing us, like we have like fragments of fragments that were recopied potentially. Like we don't have the historical documents. Like, for example, like we know that the Gospels are all anonymous, right? Like we can, like Paul is essentially the only person in any of the New Testament that we have any reliable degree of verifiable certainty that he existed as a human who walked the earth and interacted with people. So if you're basing your belief structure around the historicity of, and I'm not saying Jesus didn't exist, I actually believe that he likely was some sort of person that had a mythology potentially built around him. How can you come to a degree of certainty through the historical method, knowing that the Gospels are anonymous and we have no extant copies, that what they say is accurate?
So when it comes specifically to the texts, we rely mostly on the what most people call the Old Testament texts, or the Torah for short, the first 5 books of the Bible. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the terminology.
Yeah.
So we have the 7 undisputed letters of Paul. The other ones are disputed, but they seem to be legit enough to be canonized anyway. When they were, and then. At the time with what they had, we have the scrolls from the Qumran caves. We also have Josephus's account to help us gather a bigger picture of the kind of people that were alive, existed at the time, and widespread beliefs that did exist also following the existence of.
How does Josephus's account factor into determining the abject truth of all biblical claims, though? Because essentially, didn't Josephus just kind of affirm that there was somebody named Jesus that was worshipped, and that he had a brother named James that was killed?
Yeah, so the way history was recorded back then too is not the same way that we do it. But his affirmation is essentially a key component into the more or less the eyewitness accounts that he was in fact a person, and that we can trace a certain lineage to him.
Okay.
Because if he was something that was questionable existence, then him being a historian living in a different area away from Jerusalem and being a citizen of a foreign country would likely not have heard or thought to care to write something down he didn't think was at least objectively true in some way, shape, or form. And so his account to just essentially mention his existence is proof that there was enough eyewitness accounts to reach his ear that he thought it was important enough to write it down.
Why would that be proof that there's enough? Because Josephus didn't end up becoming a Christian and was
no. Christianity doesn't really separate from Judaism until about 135 AD.
Right. So there was enough eyewitness accounts or enough people. And I think it's tenuous to say eyewitness accounts because there technically aren't any direct eyewitness accounts, right?
And
the only one you would really have is Paul, and Paul admittedly had a vision. Yeah. Next is maybe Peter, and you only know about Peter's account through Paul documenting his conversation with Peter. And you could maybe get James, the brother of Jesus, through that. Maybe
Luke as well, and the writer of Acts.
Where do you have Luke, though?
The writer of Acts.
We don't know who wrote the book.
We don't know who wrote Acts, though.
It could have been Luke. It could have been Luke, but then which Luke is one of the questions that comes up. There's some different Lukes.
Sorry,
are you guys fans of like Tacitus as in terms of verifying that Jesus was real?
Tacitus.
He wrote the Annals. Okay, if you guys don't use them, then it's really not worth going down. But
yeah, I tend to stick to as far as that, they're damn.
Because I'll tell you what Tacitus, the historian, was doing. Tacitus was documenting beliefs of people at the time, which was during the time of Nero, about generation, generation or two after. Like Christianity was very much a thing within the first century. It was early Christianity, and it was sizable enough that they were regarded as a real sect or a real. There were real believers at the time. And that's what historians, in my view, they were just documenting the fact that, yes, there were these Christians. Here's how they were. To me, that doesn't demonstrate necessarily that a person actually exists. It says this is what the people believed. And I tend to think of early Christianity very much as like David Koresh's group out in Mount Carmel, Waco, where you've got a group of believers, or Jonestown. Take any cult that out there, and I don't mean that as a derogatory term. I'm just saying that you have a group of believers. Early Christianity, that was it. And then you have this aggressive messaging, and you're able to change people's minds because it fits within the paganistic beliefs at the time. Like, it makes sense. You've got, one God is greater than all the other gods. You already accept that gods exist. You're not atheists, but I know that, but you just haven't accepted the one true God. So we're not going to tell you that you're wrong. We're going to tell you that we believe in the highest God, and you should have no other gods before him. That fits perfectly well within Roman theology at the time. And here I'm going to start echoing things out there. I'm not an expert in this field at all, but my understanding is that it didn't have to be an it was not an extraordinary claim at the time. And the fact that there were believers in it doesn't help me in 2,000 years after the fact come to the conclusion that those beliefs were actually true. I'm ranting here, sorry.
No, you're fine. Another source document that we tend to use actually is the Talmud, which is not adverse witness. What's the term?
Hostile witness.
Hostile witness. Whereas, the Talmud begins its compilation sometime around the destruction of the Second Temple, afterwards at Yavna, and its final compilation reaches around 300 AD, and where it's codified into to basically case law. And there are eyewitness accounts from the rabbis who were alive at the time and were recording the teachings in order to help preserve Judaism that existed during the Second Temple. And that's what the Talmud is, essentially, is the idea of trying to preserve Judaism without a temple. And the rabbis that know who this Jesus is, they talk about him, they talk about some of his teachings, and they reject him as the Messiah, and even as a legitimate as an illegitimate rabbi in some cases, depending on the rabbi who's given the account. But they do acknowledge his existence, and some of his teachings are even preserved in the Talmud, because he was essentially echoing a lot of Hillel's teachings as well. So he helped to preserve some of Hillel's teachings that would have otherwise been lost when the Talmud recording was being done.
But they couldn't directly affirm his existence, though, right? They would just affirm that there was people who were recounting his teachings and that they were attributed to him in a very
and that's the way the rabbinate work. The way rabbinate passes teaching down is you would be a disciple of a rabbi, and then you would teach those teachings in the name of whoever that rabbi was.
Cool. And I'm not arguing historicity either, right? It's when you get to, like, I'll, for the sake of argument with anybody or for the sake of progressing conversation, because they all seem to digress into historicity.
I love it.
I'll grant Jesus' existence. I'll just say he existed and was a human person or whatever that walked around and preached things and said stuff and was crucified and died. I'll grant all of that, right? Sure. And that there was people who followed him. I'll grant that too. But I don't know how that even gets me to the truth of Christianity, because essentially what I'm granting is that there was an apocalyptic preacher whose claims people believed that created a belief system that became prevalent. And that's not an extraordinary claim. That's mundane.
No, it's actually that's where we agree.
Yeah.
So essentially, when Christianity becomes its own religion, a separate movement apart from Judaism, at the parting of ways, we call it, then it becomes its own animal and its own religion. Whereas for the longest time, the first 90 years of its existence, it was just another sect of Judaism. It was completely unrecognizable to the rest of Hillelite Judaism. And within that scope of Judaism, if you think someone's the Messiah, it's like, okay, cool, no big deal.
It's not a heresy.
It's like, cool that you think that. Hopefully you're right, and if you're wrong, then you're wrong. I guess that sucks, but
yeah.
But it was not really seen as a big issue. And then at the parting of ways, which is just a short way of referring to a particular historical account where the Bar Kokhba revolution, where Bar Kokhba claims to be the Messiah, and so the sect of Judaism that was largely what we would call Christian, they broke off from the revolution. Bar Kokhba gets slaughtered. The revolution comes to a grinding halt, and then Judaism essentially is like, if you so much as speak the name of this Jesus fellow, you're not a Jew. Screw you. Screw the horse you rode in on. Screw everything about you. You're not one of us. You're not a brother. You've been excommunicated. And then we see Christianity become this Catholic style religion, and so
that's interesting. That's interesting. Legitimately, that's interesting, but it still doesn't really answer my question about like how that gets you to believing, you too individually, because you said that you believe it, that he is in fact the Messiah through historical methodology.
I want to see if I can revert. I want to see if maybe I can phrase the question maybe in kind of reverse. What would have to be false in order for you to say that you are not a messianic Jew, or that you don't follow Christ's teaching, or that Jesus was the Messiah? Like, what would have to be either shown false, or what evidence would have to be missing for you to say, wow, that probably doesn't make sense?
That's a good question. I like that question.
Man, that's a question I've never actually.
Yeah, that's a really great question, an interesting question.
I'll just shut up. That's a really good
so-
question.
And I like the question because if it's one thing.
No, and it doesn't have to be one thing.
thing.
It could be
It's
it could be
anything.
it could be a whole host of things. Like for me, I would have to be like, in order for me to believe. I'm sorry, I'll let you guys think, because I'm kind of reveling in this. I love this thinking phase, because I feel like I could tell you what I would need to believe.
So I think it's important to understand in the frame of this discussion, because I feel like the premise of the discussion is going from, like, okay, the premise that we are Jewish, but then how do you come to the Jesus is the Messiah thing, when really we're working in the opposite direction. We came out of Christianity and into Judaism, but have yet still retained the belief that Jesus is the Messiah, because it's not actually in conflict with any inherent Jewish teachings taken into account in the actual historical context of the passages in question, and also cultural relevance.
Could it just be a little bit of latent Christianity then? Like, you're retaining something that is, like, emotionally, you haven't found a historical problem or a theological problem with belief retention. So since you enjoy retaining the belief, or the belief is something that's valuable to you, you have a way to comport it with your theological perspective, so that you can retain it and still feel as though you're consistent with.
No, I used to be an atheist.
So
really?
Yeah.
I thought you both did. You came out of Baptist churches. I'm sorry.
No, yeah. So I used to be an atheist. I read the Bible in order to basically take a crap on Christianity, and I eventually started.
Ridiculous.
I basically, like Paul, I just wanted nothing to do with them, and I wanted to shove it in their face and make them shut up. And then and I tried to just disprove the document as a legitimate historical source. And so my thing was, if you can prove that the word has too many issues, then you can do a big number on the belief system. And basically, long story short, through a lot of my individual research, I could not find anything credible that would say otherwise. And in fact, I found a lot of things that were just, in my opinion, extra human abilities to retain specifically the Torah text and its absolute accuracy through over 2,000 years, which we didn't have that proof until recently.
That's a whole nother can of worms.
So my thing was, if the text, to me, throughout its history, it's the longest surviving, and it's extremely accurate. 99.98 something percent as far as the Qumran caves versus what we have today, which are 2,000 years apart. And so my thing was that there has to be something else working here. Clearly, this is meant to stick around. And so my faith is built on the foundation that this isn't man-made. It couldn't be. Everything that is man-made eventually dies within 200 to 300 years, give or take. But this thing seems to surpass.
I mean, the Iliad's still around, though.
Well,
the original Iliad. So, like even Shakespeare,
original
not a single
Bible's not
original
around,
copy
though.
of Shakespeare exists.
There's no original copy of the Bible that exists, though, either.
No, I know, but I'm saying we attribute that. We say Shakespeare is this great writer, but we don't have a single original to even say so. And he only lived as early as 200 years ago. And we still consider these works great. And we say, these are accurate. This is how the play was done. And we have the biblical scriptures, which are far more accurate than these copies from the time difference from 2,000 years ago to today. And
I don't know how you can make the assessment that they're far more accurate, though.
That's what I'm saying. The Qumran caves were written over 2,000 years ago, and if you take a Qumran cave Torah scroll and compare it to a modern-day 100-year-old Torah scroll, they're exactly the same. And that's with 2,000 years of removed history.
I'd really like to reel this back, because you said something earlier that I really had a question about. You said that you went through and you tried to disprove the Bible. So you're like an atheist. You were like, I don't want anything to do with Christians or Jews or anybody. And you said that you went through and tried to disprove the Bible, and you couldn't. One of my questions, what's that?
No, go ahead.
Well, the question that I have is, what did you do prove the Bible? Like, was it the fact that there are things that line up historically with the Bible that convinced you that everything in the Bible was true?
Yeah, basically the accuracy of the document as it passes down through history. Essentially, the telephone game argument is not a real argument that you can use in this case.
I don't think I'm making an argument.
No, not you
sure.
specifically. I'm just saying, like, in general, and archaeological evidence, things that are only written in the Bible that archaeology shows is something that did happen that the rest of history had tried to erase. We have the Egyptian
Hittites.
The Hittites is a good example. We have the Egyptian time scale, which helps to line up that we use to line up archaeological history, and we have mention of Israelites in the Middle Kingdom.
If let's say that you didn't have any of this historical data or geological data whatsoever to back it up,
sure.
How would that adjust your confidence that your current belief system is true? Would that lower your confidence at all if none of that lined up? If you were to discover today, maybe like, hey, like, and I don't know if we can even pretend to go back, but let's just say that we learned that those things were inaccurate, or that maybe your sources were not valid or something. How would that change your confidence that your belief is true at the moment?
So the question, are you assuming that all the historical evidence doesn't exist, or that it's been disproven?
I'm wondering what that does for your confidence that your belief is true. I'm wondering if that is actually the reason that you believe.
Well, so correct me if I'm wrong. The question it sounds like you're asking is, if you'd never been outside to see the sky is blue, would you agree? Would you have faith that the sky is blue?
Yes, you could almost say that. Yes. Now, I want you to try to apply it fairly, though. I want you to try to make it as analogous as possible, because because I could honestly say, if I never saw that the sky was blue, I wouldn't believe the sky was blue. Blue's not that common. The fact that the sky is blue is pretty miraculous. If I had never seen the sky, I wouldn't believe it. If you didn't have this geologic record, how in what way is that connected to your belief about God or Jesus or the Messiah or Judaism?
So I would say, personally, the history is a very huge, very heavy thing that I put on as far as the belief system. Not all of it, but definitely a big portion of it. And the reason for that is, I think that usually history shows us that humanity is reliably unreliable.
I think I would agree with that.
Yeah, and so to see something as miraculous survive as the Judaism, that the Orthodox Judaism that we have today, still around over 2,000 years later, and their existence being still a thing, and their preservation of these documents in such a manner that has defied every other civilization's lifespan. That, to me, the history shows me that that's the big miracle that
retaining the texts and being able to pass them down, so that they still, to whatever degree, like, I don't want to get into the minutia of arguing accuracy, but like assuming that they're 100% accurate as they were initially written down and were retained that way. That, to you, is evidence that what was written in them is true.
It's a pretty strong, I would say it's a pretty strong argument to say that, that they are.
Yeah.
Why? Why would just somebody protecting a book that was important to them, or a group of people protecting a book that is important to them for a long enough time that it still exists several generations later, be evidence of the efficacy of anything it contains?
I'm not saying that the preservation of the book is the miracle. The preservation of the book is, in fact, a miracle, but the record that is written within the book is verified by archaeology. And so it shows that the book is true, and then also recorded accurately over time.
I want to give everybody at least like one more shot at maybe giving it a little bit of a wrap here, but a little nice bow tie on it. Guys, I think it's been wonderful so far, and I'll try to give everybody a shot here. But before we do, I want to make sure that everybody in the comments knows to leave that question. Super chats are available. You got super stickers in there. Make sure that your question gets noticed. They do sometimes get lost up there. So let's see, Seamus and Brad, if you guys want to take a extra second here, lay out maybe your statement one more time. I'll give Shannon a chance to
The
respond.
archaeology thing. Explain the archaeology thing to me.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm so excited. I want to talk forever.
I didn't realize this was a debate, so I guess we'll just have to make up a closing statement.
No, it's not a debate. It's not a debate.
No, it's not a debate.
I don't want you to
I'm
feel like
joking.
that.
I guess on my part, because the discussion kind of deviated from the initial question, which I tried to bring it back by stating that we're working backwards from Christianity, and so the initial beef, I'm going to say that I sensed in the initial questions was retaining the messiahship of Jesus while yet maintaining a Jewish practice and faith. I would say that the whole concept of a Messiah is Jewish already. To say Messianic Jew is almost a redundancy because Judaism is a Messianic faith. It's predicated on the promise and prophecy of a Messiah, and so accepting the one that has been more prominent in history with a level of accuracy regarding his existence is not necessarily problematic, considering that he didn't actually teach anything against Judaism as Christianity might present it. But again, we've got the same example here, being that there are.
You're being long-winded. Wrap it up.
There were other following.
Is Oz the equivalent of like award show music? Is that
He's always so long-winded, and I'm
You've done most of the talking.
I
this
know.
whole time.
Now, you two get a room.
But there were other people who claimed to be the Messiah, and they had followings, big followings, and they have all died out.
This is all really interesting. I don't really have much follow-up, because any follow-up I have is going to end up being another 45-minute long conversation. I just want to thank you guys for engaging. These aren't easy conversations to have always. So thank you both for being interesting and engaging and good interlocutors. And I hope you felt respected and heard in the dialogue. So thank you for participating with me. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. These are things worth talking about and worth talking about well. So thank you for being good partners. I appreciate you.
And I'll defer here to Oz, the man, the myth. Oz.
Man, the myth.
For everybody that was on the screen, that was amazing, guys. And the chat area was fully engaged and great conversations there. So thank you, guys. That was awesome. And as always, Seamus and Brad, thanks for hanging out with us tonight and having that conversation. You guys are always great to have on. Great sports, great conversation, and then obviously Shannon was remarkable as usual in her question asking, and Ben was in there dropping bombs as well tonight. So great job to you guys. We appreciate it. And I don't know if Shannon has ever met Murdershed Steve, but here's the murderous one.
So I figured I'd go out to the shooting range today and do a little toot-a-loot-toot with the big boomstick. And I had a buddy come with me and had him wear some tennis shoes. Turns out I'm a lot better at hitting a moving target than I thought. How's it going, everybody?
The Toodaloop boomstick.
Yes. Tooting around with my boom boom.
I'm so happy.
Hey, how's it going, Shannon?
I love you.
I love you too. So we've got lots and lots of questions.
Not sure.
Waiting all day.
So let's get into it. All right. So right off the bat, I've got a question from Titan Uranus.
With the toodaloo belt.
With the toodaloo tooty-doo to Shannon Q. Do you like cheesecake?
It's my entire worldview. I love it. It's amazing. That's a throwback to my Darth Dawkins conversation that I had. He asked me what my worldview is, and I was so infuriated and annoyed with him. And then I just said, I just like cheesecake. And that and now he goes around the internet saying, she's so stupid. She doesn't even have a worldview. She likes cheesecake. And I did. That's true. That's what I said.
I presupposed that cheesecake is delicious. So.
It's amazing. You're right.
Yeah.
Where does he talk about people at?
Discord and in every YouTube comment section I've ever been on in the history of time until people blog him.
I wonder what he says.
So many things. I don't read most of them because I don't care.
I'm just curious now.
Which is fair.
Good luck. Good luck. Enjoy. Go on Discord.
So I've got another question here from Velocilobster. I haven't heard from him in a while. For the theists, if I beat my slave on the Sabbath, is that considered working? And if so, should I then be put to death?
Everyone likes to bring up the slavery or the Sabbath issue.
The short answer is yes.
The
Hey, you know what? I think that is an acceptable answer, and I think we should keep it at that.
Yeah.
Only because we have so many. We've already talked at length with you guys about this, and that was a fun little joke thing. But
yeah.
Hey, Murdershed Steve.
Yeah.
I see a little super chat popped up. You see that?
I did. That's the one that I was going to hit right now.
Awesome.
No, it wasn't.
Hey, it wouldn't have popped up that quick if I didn't have it queued up. That's all I'm saying, Benji.
Hey, I
can provide evidence for that.
I'm questioning your answer.
I'm answering your question.
Oh, dadgummit.
So, Shannon Q, question 1, is the emotional support Canadian a boot to be over? And question 2, your thoughts on religious being mentally ill and religion a form of mental illness. Thanks for your work and sharing.
Somebody knows the answer to the second question because I spent a lot of time prattling on about it and pinned a video to the top of my channel about why religion is not a mental illness and people should fuck off with that. So am I allowed to swear? Sorry. Mess off with that. It's because it's intensely pejorative also because you're essentially weaponizing a conceptualization of mental illness as being something that's detrimental and utilizing that as a weapon to wield against people who may or may not have actual mental health disorders, but none of them are their belief in religion. Not saying that religion in many cases can't exacerbate or bring about mental health disorders, and there's lots of evidence that that is the case, but in and of itself, it is absolutely not. And if you are interested in learning more, including academic citations, I would strongly suggest you go to my channel and watch the pinned video. Enjoy the comments section. It's a shit show. I've never made a more controversial video, and I don't care. I'll do it again.
Fuck yeah.
And I will be your emotional support Canadian, absolutely. If you need emotional support, I am giving a big virtual hug as your emotional support Canadian to everyone who needs it.
From the ESC.
ESC.
Emotional Support Canadian.
Oh, okay. I didn't get
it's
the
a
acronym
big
immediately.
HUG from the
ESC. Shannon, sorry about that. Where do they find that video again?
It's called Stop Calling Religion a Mental Illness, and it's literally pinned to the top of my YouTube channel, which is just called Shannon Q, because I'm incredibly creative in every conceivable way. So that's the name of my YouTube channel. It's just my name. So it's right pinned to the top of the channel.
And then Steve, what is it? What?
The ESC.
No, I need the DMX version like you did. I was setting you up there. Speed you up.
The ESC. Anyhow, hey, actually, I was not very creative either and used my birth given name as well, Murdershed Steve. So I have a question, Ben, actually.
Oh, okay.
There it is. Hey, I made that video.
And we're very proud of you.
I did that. Look at I did that.
I did a thing. So I have a question, actually, Ben, for you. If you're willing to field a question from the Christ himself.
My son, you're out there?
Yes.
Okay.
Question for Ben. What would need to be false in your belief so that you believed in God or Messiah?
In my belief, what would need to be false? I'm not sure which beliefs I have that negate the existence of God. And I hate to be
What
so...
about the whole
What's that?
The whole of biblical history would have to be wrong in order for me to believe.
Yeah, God, I think my conception of God would have to be wrong. Right? Like, I would have to be wrong that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and all caring. My conceptions of God, the current ones that I'm aware of, would have to be wrong. And instead, another conception of God would have to be correct.
So
that's about as straightforward as I can get.
So if I were to say, like, God is an alien that came down and spread his seed with great apes of some sort, and then something else came about, would that be a reasonable belief?
If that could be demonstrated, right? So that my current understandings would have to be wrong is basically what I'm saying. Like, my entire framework of understanding of how the universe works would have to be wrong. That's what would have to be false. It's kind of a lot of things, I guess.
The entire all of the evidence against it would have to not exist anymore.
Ben, just so you know, I'm not laughing at your answer. I'm laughing at Steve's fucking face the whole time.
No, it's a hard question to answer because it's right. So the common answer, and I'm trying to avoid just saying, well, my belief is a lack of belief. Like, I'm trying to give something a little bit more substantive, so like trying to include a little bit more into my thought process. But I could just say, look, it's not even a belief that God doesn't exist. I would just need God to be demonstrated.
Word.
I got a question from Lola Ray. Shannon Q, I love how this question is phrased, by the way. In what line of work are you? No prepositions there. Did your studies in psychology help with your transition away from faith? And if so, how?
I'm a really boring corporate shill who the line of work that I do is not in psychology. I shilled out. I took my degree and shilled out so that I could, buy my kid all his dental surgery. And I studied, I did study psychology, and it played heavily into my deconversion, but it was a confluence of things. It wasn't simply my study of psychology. It was life experience, studying history, being exposed to other people not being able to answer my questions, me finding answers to questions I thought I already knew the answers to. It turns out I was wrong. Going through the experience of realizing what it's like to be wrong about something that's a deeply held belief, and knowing that you can reconcile that and be okay, and that it's not the existential crisis that you think it might be or are taught that it should be, is a really important exercise and endeavor to go into, or at least bring yourself to the precipice of that whenever you can, so that you believe as many true things as possible, as my friend Matt says. But yeah,
I think I've only personally been to the precipice once or twice.
Once or twice? That's not nearly enough time at the precipice.
I need to
precipice a bit more. Precipice more. Precipice more.
Every time I study psychology, I just have panic attacks.
Really? Why? Why?
Have you ever seen that South Park episode where they're taunting the Tooth Fairy?
No, anyway, I don't watch a lot of TV.
Kyle starts reading all this philosophy. And as he's reading this philosophy, he finally has this existential crisis where he doesn't know if he exists.
Oh yeah,
and then he becomes like that thing that was stealing the teeth. Giant chicken
everywhere and nowhere. But when I I really liked studying sociology and psychology as my electives in college.
Yeah,
and if you leave me alone with a psychology book, I start psychoanalyzing myself. And then that just leads to this cycle. And then I just have a panic attack because I'm like, do I exist? You know,
Do you ever have the back and forth tennis with yourself between
all the time
and nihilism?
Ignorance is bliss.
Am I a brain in the vat? Does nothing matter? Am I a brain in the vat? Does nothing matter?
Jeff, whenever I psychoanalyze you, I also get a panic attack. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
It's very hard for me to
find that. Honestly, this is a natural state of being when psychoanalyzing Jeff. All right.
Anybody to find a good therapist because I'm so like critical of myself, and I already know some of the playbook. So the first few moments that you're starting and if you ever had a new therapist, it's always like, you're on exactly like wrong scale here. You're not tracking with me, and it takes someone some time to get there.
I know 3 therapists who have retired after one session with just Jeff.
One was 33.
So I've got another question for the theists in the room down there at the bottom that are covered up now. If you are Messianic, thank you very much. I always have to mispronounce at least one word. In that you acknowledge Hebrews 8, saying that the old law is obsolete. Isn't it a contradiction to also be Jewish, honoring the Tanakh as God's law? I'm new to all this atheism stuff, so I don't know these words yet.
So Hebrews 8 is not talking about the law. It's talking about the priesthood, and that the priesthood is worldly and it's not heavenly, and so it's for here, not there. So whatever translation you're reading that says the law is obsolete, burn it.
Hebrews 8 is explaining a difference in jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's a completely different. It's the other world versus this world, and then the Tanakh, as far as basically you can't be a Jew, more or less. Romans 11 and Ephesians 2 basically states, and I'm paraphrasing, if you don't recognize yourself as being Jewish, at least on a spiritual level, then you're not saved. And that's a very paraphrased version of that, but essentially the promise belongs to Israel, not to Gentiles. And so if you're not adopted into the family of Israel, i.e. Jewish, then you're not a saved person because there's no covenant for the Gentiles.
Also, Matthew 5:17 through 19, Jesus blatantly affirms the authority of the Jewish law. So
this is going to kill David not being able to respond. Pastor John in the chat here.
Get out of here, Pastor John.
Have us on your show, David.
Pastor John, you already know.
Stop giving him
you're not getting airtime.
Look,
no airtime.
Look, he gets no airtime until he uses a super chat. So don't even mention his name.
This is extortion.
Either that or he has to stop talking about necrophilia in front of people.
Everybody should probably do that. Can we all agree to adopt that as a policy?
No.
Murdershed.
Not with his daughter on his lap.
Not all of us.
With his daughter on his lap, to boot.
I've got a quick question.
I don't want to know the story. I regret everything I already said.
Hey, anybody else have 2 left feet? All right, moving on.
I knew a guy that had 1 left foot, but he doesn't anymore. I've got a question from Mark of Legend. We're so glad to have you, Shannon. Question for me: where do you hide all the bodies, and how do you sleep at night with all the killings? Now, I have a counter question, Mark. Can you demonstrate? Do you have sufficient evidence to prove that I have done any killings of these killings that you say of? Ridiculous. I don't even care what the answer is.
Should have just answered with your favorite.
I'm a hard atheist. I don't give a fuck about your answers. Somebody's gonna chop that shit up.
All day for this. I'm so happy.
Hey,
I got one more question for Shannon Q, and then we'll wrap up that Q&A.
Hold on, Steve. We get just to not break up that flow. Jim Bitten just put a super chat about you.
About me?
Yeah.
Can I do the question first, or do you think there it is? Great conversation. And Oz, I see why you tried to hide Murdershed, Steve. Jim Benton. That sounds a lot like somebody else we knew.
It's Tommy Benson's uncle.
I know, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
That son of a gun. Sean Alexandre would like to know, what are the main differences in religious influences between Canada and the US?
Oh, that's interesting. Because I think it varies regionally. So, for example, there are districts in Canada, not mine, but in Alberta and Ontario, where they have publicly funded Catholic school boards. So you actually have a choice between going to a public school or a Catholic school, and the Catholic schools have the benefit of having additional funding because they get the same amount of public funding, but also get funding from the church. So yeah, so better education system there, but also daily prayer and religious education is incorporated into the public school system as a result. So we have our own issues, right? It doesn't seem as in your face, my freedom, Jesus hellfire, like wacky. Like we have some separation of church and government issues here that need to be worked out, but for the most part, in the day-to-day, we're not as inundated with the what's her face, the religious leader that Trump had that was like doing Hail Marys.
Yeah.
We
got a video coming out about that particular topic next week, actually.
Thank you for that.
Bananas. I was like, she's the religious. Oh, okie all right, then we're gonna. And I wonder how we got here. That's weird.
So sometimes you look at other Christians and we go, "Oh man, they make us all."
Atheists sometimes do that to us too. That's just a matter of existence, I think.
Truth.
I don't really want to start a whole thing, but I've heard legends told that women have bodily autonomy in Canada.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
They like have rights and stuff.
Yep. We do. Yeah. That's great. Uh-huh. And we can use our free healthcare to go and exercise that autonomy. Whatever. And I know it's not free because it comes out of our taxes and or businesses pay for it through health tax. What's interesting, I could go on about healthcare for ages because people talk about taxes and how our taxes must be higher. But actually in a lot of jurisdictions, there's something called EHT, which is like an emergency fund and health tax. And it's usually a percentage of any business that's over however many $1 million in payroll. They have to pay between 1.95 and 2% of their payroll revenue to a tax agency that goes directly into health and education funds so that we can fund education and healthcare, not just through the individual's taxes, but the businesses that employ people here in Canada and benefit from our business here as citizens also have to contribute to the system. And they do so gladly because they lower their insurance costs because we also still have private insurance here and are able to have healthier employees who report don't go on long-term disability as much. Also, we have employment insurance here. So if we do have to go off because we're sick, we can continue to get paid. And our jobs are guaranteed. But anyway, yeah, we definitely have bodily autonomy here. Absolutely. We all have the right to choose, and we can just go get contraceptives whenever we feel like it.
It's almost as if, like, as a social creature, like taking care of each other might be a good idea.
I've heard that I'm wrong about that.
Okay.
A lot.
Fair enough.
Loudly. But I would agree with you.
So to answer Grumpy Old Cuss's little statement here, I was building a new pipe, okay? Just relax. It's fine. And I want to thank everybody for stopping by the Murdershed, where answers get questioned.
Sorry, I wasn't ready.
Looking for a new and challenging opportunity? Do you have previous landscaping, mortuary, or medical experience? Are you available to work flexible hours, including nights and weekends? Are you ready to get involved in a business where you can simply make a killing? If you answered yes to these questions, then the Murdershed Steve Intern Program wants to hear from you. Registration for the 2021 season is now underway. Contact us today for an information package to get you started. Many valuable perks are available for those willing to reach out and grab them. Qualified participants must agree to have street epistemology applied to anything they say.
Oz, can I hear you?
Yeah, I hit unmute. My bad, guys. If we can have Shannon back up on the screen, please. what a great episode, guys. Tons and tons of fun. Ben, great job tonight. And Shannon, you were amazing. Not that we expect anything less, but you killed it all night long. So thank you for being with us.
You guys are
We
way
appreciate
too
it.
nice. It's hard to deal with, but thank you. I was appreciative of being here. It was lovely. I had a great time. Thank you.
Good. Glad I enjoyed it. We can be a little silly sometimes, but it was fun. Before we go off, Shannon, is there anything else you'd like to share? And if you would, one last time, because we've had a bunch of new folks pile in, share again where they can find you, how they can find you, that sort of thing, before we sign off for the night.
Oh, for sure. So, hi, I'm Shannon Q. I have a YouTube channel called Shannon Q. I talk about the intersection of psychology and faith. I have complex conversations. So, I have people who disagree with me, who talk about complex issues or controversial issues and try to model better dialogues. There it is. That's my channel. If you want to go there and check me out, there's a lot of different, there's a wide variety of content of me talking to theists, me talking to experts, me talking to philosophers, me doing independent videos. I also host a couple of call-in shows. One of the call-in shows I host is called The Line. It has its own separate channel. And the second one that I'm a co-host of is called The Atheist Experience. And I think that's probably one that people are a little bit more familiar with. I co-host with my friend Matt Delahunty once a month. I'm in the rotation over there now as a regular co-host. And sometimes I'm on Pelagia's channel every once in a while. Every so often. I haven't been in a while. We'll be on New Year's Eve, though. I'm that atheist chick you saw in that video and you couldn't quite figure out where you recognized me from. That's who I am.
And experiencing atheists, what is that? I've never heard of that before. Experiencing atheists?
The atheist, I know it's a really grassroots show. Barely anybody has heard of it. And we're really hoping that it's going to take off. But my co-host is a bit of a wet sack. I'm trying to get people onto him. But it's really, really difficult because he doesn't know anything. He's intolerable. It's a whole thing. I don't want to get into it's drama, but anyway, check it out, see if you like it.
And I did want to shout out Alternate Media, who were our guests today. We had I had Alternate Media Brad and Alternate Media Seamus on TikTok. Hey, yeah, if you guys want to spell it out, make sure that everybody's aware.
Yeah, it's alternate. Alternate is spelled as in altar, like the sacrificial altar with the two A's. So Alternate Media, we have a YouTube channel, Alternate Media, with our series Killing the Church. It's conversations about things that need to be killed in the church or the church itself. Who knows? Go watch, find out. And we're also on TikTok, and we're on Apple Podcasts now too. So just search Alternate Media on Apple Podcasts, and we're there too.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And I do want to say Simply Secular, big shout out. The outro for Murdershed Steve was actually created by Simply Secular. So, and sent that in. So it's really cool when you start getting subscribers and fans sending you content, because they're a fan of the segment or the show or whatever. So we appreciate that. That's awesome. So one last time, thank you guys. And everybody remember the 15th, we have the OG of street epistemology, Anthony Bagdabasco, coming on to hang out with us and chop it up. So come do that. And in the meantime, we'll talk to you guys later. This is the Atheist Roundtable. We're out.